Good evening. This is History News 102. I'm your host, Emily Shablanca, and today we'll be digging into the New York Times Book of the Year, A Mercy by Toni Morrison. But first, let's learn a little bit about the book. In the 1680s, the slave trade in America was still in its infancy. Jacob Varick is an Anglo-Dutch trader and adventurer with a small holding in the harsh north. Despite his distaste for dealing in flesh, he takes a small slave girl in part payment for a bad debt from a plantation owner in Catholic Maryland. This is Florence, who can read and write and may be useful on his farm. Rejected by her mother, Florence looked for love, first from Lena, an older servant woman at her new master's house, and later from a handsome blacksmith, an African never enslaved who comes riding into their lives. A Mercy reveals what lies beneath the surface of slavery, and at its heart, like Beloved, is the ambient, disturbing story of a mother and daughter, a mother who casts off her daughter in order to save her, and a daughter who may never exercise that abandonment. We will be looking at this book with the lens of a feminist literary criticism. We are joined today with 4 special guests. First-hand experiences from Florence, Lena, and Sorrow, as well as Mariana Carson, a grade 12 reader. Thanks for joining us. This is History News 102. So the first person who I'm going to be introducing you today is Mariana Carson. She is the grade 12 student that has read through Toni Morrison's A Mercy. And she's going to be going through this book with us and digging out all of the different views that we can see and how, using a feministic lens, we can dig so much deeper into this book than we ever expected. So, take it away, Mariana.
Thanks, Emily. Before we dig into the book, I want to look at some background knowledge. Toni Morrison is an African-American author and professor who has written many books and articles on the subject of African-American women and their rights. I have just finished reading A Mercy by Toni Morrison. It's a novel based in 1670s America, and I could clearly see the feminism and struggles that the African-American women encounter. Throughout the novel, as I looked through the lens of a feminist literary theory criticism, I saw many instances of feminism and how they relate to the world today. This novel is a nonfiction story, but the struggles of the African-American woman in it are struggles that I believe that should not go unnoticed. Before I go into different examples of feminism in the book, it is important to understand what feminism is. Feminism is defined from Webster's dictionary as the theory of political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. According to Purdue Owl, feminism criticism is concerned with the ways in which literature and other cultural productions reinforce or undermine the economic, political, social, and psychological oppression of women.
All right, so the first person we're going to be hearing about today is Florence. So she's going to say a couple of her instances where in her life this story portrayed how men have influenced that in a negative way, or how feminism has shaped her life.
Thanks, Emily. So I am Florence. Some people say I'm the protagonist in this story, but I don't want fame. I just want people to know my story and how feminism made me who I was today, and how my struggle in this book was very, very predominantly feministic based. I have never felt valued by a man. And this is something that's very hard for me to say, let alone on national television, but the men in my life have never viewed me as something worth giving a second glance, unless I was naked. But to start off, I lived with my mother. I don't know who my father was. By now, I'm guessing that it was the owner, Dortega, where we lived in our farm. He was a brutal man, and he very, very brutally and violently raped every woman in our plantation. And my mother was very much a part of that. He always seemed to be coming up to my mother and grabbing her in certain ways. And that just scared me as a child, because I didn't know that this was wrong. And I was like, okay, so guys are allowed to talk to me like this, and they're allowed to grab me like this. And so my view of men from a very, very young age was shaped in this way. that it was all right. This was the norm. Men were the superiority. Sorry. And that's just how it was. So Dortega, he was my owner at first. And then Jacob comes along, and he was a younger man, very, very nice. He really did have a good heart. So he came, and he was trying to buy a slave from Dortega. And so I was the slave that was going to be going with him. And I didn't feel valued at all by Dortega at that time because, yeah, all of a sudden he's just like, sure, take her. Go, take her. It's like I didn't want you in the first place kind of thing. Be like, yeah, get out of here. We don't need you. Which really hurt my feelings because I worked so incredibly hard for him in his plantation, and I was young, and I worked so hard for him, and I was a good worker. I worked just as good as some of the boys, but just because I was a female, he didn't want me. No one looked at me as if I was as strong as a boy, or looked at me as in a way that I could be as worthy as a boy. And, I didn't know that was wrong.
In the story, Florence meets and falls in love with a free African-American blacksmith. They have a sexual relationship, but he ends up leaving her after he is done working with Jacob, without as much as a goodbye to her. She has no personal value to him, and she is only an object to please his sexual desires. Later on in the story, she has to go with him and bring him back to the estate so he could heal her mistress, Rebecca. Instead of accompanying him back, she is to stay at his place and care for a small boy. Without any hesitation, she is left to do the duties of a stereotypical woman. While she was looking after the boy, she grabbed his arm when he was crying and accidentally broke it. When the blacksmith returned, he immediately blames Florence, whom he has known longer, and instead cares for the boy, putting the boy's worth in front of hers. Florence explained, "The back of your hand strikes my face. No tender fingers to touch where you hurt me. I cower." Morrison.
That was
Next, we'll be hearing from Lena, a Native American woman in this story, and she's going to be telling us one instance in the story where she witnessed feminism.
Hi, so I'm Lena. The experience that most stood out to me when I witnessed feminism in my life was before I went to live with Jacob, and it turns out our whole entire village was wiped out by the smallpox, and it was very, very traumatic. But I was taken in by the Presbyterians, and I was in love with one of the males there, and he beat me. This eye was completely swollen. I couldn't see out of it. I had a cut from here all the way to my lip, and my lip was big and bleeding. I had cuts all over my legs, as well as a few broken bones in my ribs.
Lena was beaten by a lover and forced to walk through town, bruised and bleeding, a very humiliating experience. Again, this shows how invaluable women are, and in the novel, her wounds were described as, "Lena's swollen eye had calmed, and the lash cuts on her face, arms, and legs had healed and were barely noticeable." Morrison. She had experienced a great amount of abuse and suffering, but her injuries were described as a minor thing, that she just had to suck up and wait for healing. The Native American women were fighting a double victory, one to end slavery and the other to end discrimination based on gender.
The last person that we will be hearing from today is Sorrow. She is a great character in this story because she overcomes some of that feminism that she's faced with.
Thanks, Emily. So, yeah, I am Sorrow. I don't go by that anymore. By now, I'm complete, which is what my life is. It's a story of true hope, and I have totally changed my life around. At the beginning, back when this story took place, I was so broken and I had nothing with me. I had no life. I was a slave. When Florence came to live with us, I was pregnant. I don't want to disclose who that father is because he was very good to me. He was a good man, but yeah, we made some bad choices, and it wasn't my fault. I didn't have a choice in it. But I lost that baby, and it was the most devastating thing that could ever happen to me. As a woman, that is one of the things that we can do that a man can't do. We can give birth. And when that baby died, I lost all hope of life. That was the only thing I had left. And when I lost that, my life was shattered. And I couldn't think, I couldn't talk, I wasn't myself. And it was a terrible point in my life. But later on, I did have a baby. And she's beautiful, and it really shows me how if I am true to who I am and I don't listen to the voices that men have for me, and that I can choose my own destination. This is not what the world tells us today, but as a woman, I can be strong. I can choose. And it was very different back then, but even then, I decided this was the way it was going to be. I wasn't going to be shackled by the weight of what a man wanted me to be. And I changed my name. I am not going to be sorrowful. I'm going to be complete. My child made me complete.
The way women are portrayed in the novel demonstrates a period of time where feminism was normal, and to me it is almost a cry for help. Toni Morrison lays history out in a clear way while making it entertaining to teach others of the story. I was thinking about the significance of the patriarchal system and decided that since it was such a predominant way of life in our culture, it is so rooted in our brains that it probably is the reason we have not fully overcome this issue. It is clear in the book that the women were constantly responding to the men's needs, which lead to the women's needs being overlooked often. Men equal power when women equal submission, which is the forefront of a lot of sexual assaults and rape, not only in the book, but also in the world today.
And that concludes today's production of Historature News 102. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you return tomorrow night for a new episode.